Today I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break from the usual antics because this is something that I find just inherently interesting, and it's something that I feel like not enough people are talking about. It's being talked about, don't get me wrong. I just feel like not enough people are talking about it, and it's just interesting to me. And essentially, the story is that right now there are 2 astronauts that are stranded in space due to issues with the capsule that is supposed to be taking them home. And once you hear the details of this entire thing, it kind of becomes interesting, especially considering who made the spaceship. And spoiler alert, it rhymes with going. Yes, you heard me right. There are 2 astronauts that are stranded in space because there were issues with the Boeing Starliner. Boeing. You know, that company that was dealing with a little bit of, issues with their company. So essentially, on June 5th, this June, Boeing launched their Starliner into orbit and into space. So the ship launched on June 5th, and it actually went pretty swimmingly. The problem was that once it launched, engineers started to discover that there was problems, because there were helium leaks from the thruster system, I believe it was. And so that started to cause problems with the aircraft. And because of these issues with the spacecraft, they had to delay the return for the astronauts. Now, there's something important that you need to bear in mind, is that they launched on June 5th, and they were supposed to, the original return date was supposed to be June 13th. But that time got delayed. It got delayed once, it got delayed twice, and it actually got delayed 3 times. And this was a trip that was originally supposed to take only 1 week, and then they were supposed to return home. But because of issues with this spacecraft and also the space capsule, they are still up there. And as of right now, as of filming this, and probably by the time I post this, they're probably still going to be up there. A trip that was supposed to take 1 week is probably going to be taking over 1 month. And to Boeing's credit, and to the credit of everybody that was in charge of that launch and that entire operation, delays are not uncommon. They happen. Sometimes those stays up in space get delayed a week more, or maybe even a month more. The problem is that the reason that they are getting delayed is because of an issue with the spacecraft that's supposed to be taking them home. And what makes it just even more interesting is the fact that this was Boeing that did it. And this entire thing was just really unfortunate for Boeing, because all the stuff that's happening, like the planes falling apart, it's been happening for a couple years, but this Starliner spacecraft that was supposed to be launched into space was delayed by a couple of years, so it was kind of, for the most part, before everything happened. It was especially before, airplanes started to fall apart and whistleblowers started to get, So it was before that, and this right now just seems like another issue with Boeing, and it's just another reason why people are becoming not so trustworthy of Boeing. Granted, not a lot of people are going to space, but still. What's really interesting, and I didn't really realize until after researching all this, is that Boeing, for most of space travel history, had a pretty steady hand in kind of getting everything where they needed to go. Boeing actually helped pave the path for space travel and getting things into orbit to go around the moon, to take pictures and stuff like that. So for a while, they really did help with space travel. The problem is, and a point that people continue to make when people keep saying, "No, did you know that Boeing was actually part of space travel?" is that was old Boeing. This is new Boeing. New Boeing is not like old Boeing. I don't know how many airplanes I need to, show pictures of and tell stories of in order to get that point across. And it's a Boeing where now engineering and creating stuff sometimes is a little bit of a shoddy job, especially when you consider that they make their airplanes kind of makeshift with stuff from hotel rooms, like toothpaste and toothpicks, which I'm pretty sure one of those is actually correct. And it's because of that reason these astronauts are still in space. We're not really getting a whole lot of information about when they're going to be going home. And this is something that they have to get absolutely correct. Because when the door blows off of the plane, you know what happens? Oxygen masks come down, it's like, sorry, Boeing screwed up another plane, breathe out this bag. When it happens in space, you're dead. It has to be almost perfect, if not exactly perfect. It's an exact science. Zero gravity is a lot more different than, flying through the air with wings. And as much as I hate throwing out this statistic because it doesn't really make me feel any better, airplanes are a lot more safe than people think because they've got 4 engines. There's a lot of, different safety precautions and procedures that are done in order to make sure that the plane doesn't go ba-boom or fall out of the sky. As shoddy as a job most of the Boeing planes are nowadays, they at least have some degree of safety to make sure that they don't crash and burn. There are exceptions to that rule, obviously, but those rules are in place and they do exist. But the Boeing Starliner is just it's an entirely different deal. It's an entirely different league, because you're floating around and you need to make sure that you get, through the atmosphere, that silly little thing up in the sky that burns things that start coming down, like rocks or people or spacecrafts. So while they're tinkering with this and trying to figure out why this is happening, those astronauts can't come down until it's perfect, until they've actually figured out the problem. Which means Boeing can't be seen tinkering around and just, makeshifting it. They have to do it perfectly. I guarantee you the last thing that Boeing needs on its reputation and on its name are astronauts that die when they come back to Earth. And issues with spacecrafts happen. It just inherently does. This isn't the first time that something's gone wrong up in space. It happens, I think, more than people think. Sometimes to smaller levels, sometimes to bigger levels. In fact, I guarantee you that with every single launch that's ever happened, there's always a little something that goes wrong that people have to fix pretty rapidly. I mean, that's why they have the Houston Control Center, or whatever the control center is on the ground, while the people are doing it up in the space station. But then you have bigger issues that are a lot more urgent, that require a lot more attention. This is unfortunately one of those events, and it's unfortunately Boeing. And not to mention, this was a spacecraft that was delayed by a couple years. So you would think that within that time that they've used to, make sure that the spacecraft is actually ready, that they would tweak around with stuff. And this might unfortunately be one of those cases where it just happens and stuff just happens. But what I'm more, questioning and wondering is if this is just stuff that happened during launch, or is this somebody not doing their job correctly? Because we've had so many examples this year and in these past years of Boeing not doing their job correctly. And that just kind of begs the question, are the reason that these astronauts are in space just a random unfortunate event that happened during launch, or was it because Boeing didn't do their job thoroughly? I personally am inclined to go either way, but if you look at the comments on any video that goes over this launch and what's happening with the astronauts that are stuck in space, most of the comments are kind of the same opinion, that this is just Boeing doing a bad job. How could I trust Boeing to get me into space if they can't even fly airplanes and make airplanes? Now that's pretty much the sentiment that's being spread around the internet, and I think rightfully so. Even if they don't deserve it, their reputation by this point has become so bad that this unfortunate thing that's happening with these astronauts, it's just another thing that people are pinning on Boeing and their terrible construction of planes, and now spacecrafts. And I think the unfortunate truth is that whether they succeed, which I sincerely hope they do, I don't think it really matters, because their reputation is once again soiled because this is their machine that they created and something's gone wrong. And again, stuff like that happens in space. But when you already have a reputation of your planes, which are different than spacecrafts, but once you have a reputation of your machines and vehicles not working properly, or being really poorly done, or falling apart, or even crashing, it doesn't matter if it's your fault or not, it just looks bad on you as a company. At the end of the day, these astronauts are still up in space, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I hope more people cover this than there already are, because this is just inherently interesting. And while you have a lot of people like Yahoo Business, for some reason, following this, and there are people following it, I just hope that it gets a little bit more recognition. And in the end, I hope that these astronauts are brought back safely, and I hope that everything in the end just goes swimmingly, and that they have a perfect splashdown back on Earth, where it's safe. Nice ground. But we're gonna have to wait and see. But that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, if indeed you still are. My name is Brockster, and I bid you all adieu.